Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you all for coming here on this incredibly gloomy day. I'm shocked to see so many people here despite the rain, so thank you. So very shortly, I know you came for a housing event, but as you can see, this is actually going to be a rock band very shortly. Aaron's going to be lead singer. So lots to look forward to today. But anyway, yeah, welcome everybody. So my name is Nick Ferris. I'm the treasurer of the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. We're the organizers. Thank you. This is the third town hall, specifically on the issue of housing, that we're organizing. And basically, San Franciscans are losing a lot of our rights, and specifically our rights for public and community input. There's also a lot of information and misinformation out there about the issue of housing. So really, we're just here to bring on a panel of experts, open up a conversation, educate people on what's happening, and start it down. So if you enjoy this event, please become a member of the Telegraph Hill Dwellers. It's $35 for a year, and supports events like this, so thank you. On that note, I would like to introduce our moderator for this event, our District 3 Supervisor and the President of the Board of Supervisors, Aaron Peskin.
Thank you, Nick, and thank you to the Telegraph Hill Dwellers, and most of all, thanks to all of you for braving the rain and joining us for this panel. And like Nick said, this is part of an ongoing educational effort by the Telegraph Hill Dwellers to keep everyone informed about the ever-changing, more quickly changing by the minute landscape around housing development, not only here in San Francisco, but throughout the state of California. And I want to thank our incredible panelists for being here this afternoon and giving of their time and their expertise and their perspectives. I've worked with many of them. Kyle Smeallie, who is now the new policy director for the San Francisco Community Land Trust. And for those of you who do not know about the Community Land Trust, Kyle will tell you a little bit, but they actually own affordable housing not far from where we are sitting, down the street on Columbus Avenue, where North Beach and downtown and Jackson Square and Chinatown all come together. Fernando Marti, who I've worked with in various incarnations, but is the former director of the Council of Community Housing Organizations, which Fernando will tell you a little bit about. Brooke, who like myself got her start in neighborhood activism and has founded a new coalition of neighborhood groups, the Neighborhoods United San Francisco, to really start getting the word out. And Jovita Mendoza, who like me is a legislator not far away in Brentwood, California, and is here on behalf of a statewide movement, Our Neighborhood Voices. So thank you for coming. San Francisco's housing and land use record is much maligned by folks in Sacramento and even our own elected state representatives, and maligned by the local media and beyond our local media in what I, for one, see as a concerted multi-year effort to preempt local authority over housing and other land use issues. It's not only about housing. And the facts put forward by this relentless, well-funded campaign are repeated without question, without citation, and are often taken as universal truths. But as we try to reassert our ability to govern locally, free from state interference, I think it's important that we correct the record. And today's discussion is a part of that effort. And it's worth putting this all in a historical context that harks back to the dark days of San Francisco's experience with redevelopment back in the 1950s and 1960s, which is now, I think, universally held as a colossal planning mistake with deeply racist undertones that led to the displacement of thousands of predominantly lower-income people of color in San Francisco's Fillmore District and Japantown, and the destruction of intact, cohesive communities and loss of hundreds of historic buildings. And that era spawned changes in San Francisco politics that went beyond San Francisco, changes in how we dealt with land use over the decades to this day, and legislation ranging from laws governing giving preference to those who are displaced so that they can return to new affordable housing units, even today, to the creation of historic preservation laws and anti-eviction laws, the mass evictions and demolitions down the street at the International Hotel that ripped Manilatown apart in the late 1970s led to laws that created stronger eviction protections, demolition protections, protections for single resident occupancy buildings, and spawned an entire effort to create more affordable housing in San Francisco. And of course, the building of the Fontana Towers back in 1962, the freeway revolts that mobilized San Franciscans to oppose development that would wall us off from our waterfront and reduce access to our public shorelines is a part of that history. But today, much is being justified under the banner of housing, and local control is being taken away by Sacramento. And the reality, and I saw this in the two previous things that the Telegraph Hill Dwellers put on, most folks in San Francisco don't know all that is happening in Sacramento. Last year alone, actually as of January 1st of this year, 16 new bills preempting local governments in land use authority were passed. Our city attorneys, 5 of them, are still trying to make sense of what they all mean. But I think it's also important to examine the facts. And so before we turn this over to the next hour to our panel and then have a roundtable discussion and questions from the audience, I think that we need to talk a little bit about San Francisco's record on housing, because it has been dramatically misrepresented. San Francisco's housing production record is a hell of a lot better than we are being told. Although it is true that San Francisco has topped the state with the longest timeline for pre- and post-development entitlements, according to the Housing and Community Development Office in the state of California, our housing production fares much better when looking at units completed over a slightly longer time horizon. Since 2005, San Francisco has produced 51,353 net new housing units, 29% of them affordable, or 15,086 affordable units, representing a total increase in the housing stock of about 14%. This according to the San Francisco Planning Department. And during that same period of time, our population decreased by 3.9%. According to the state's data, from its statewide database of entitlements, permitting and completions, which it has been compiling only since 2018, for the period from 2018 to 2022, San Francisco is second only to Los Angeles in the number of completed housing units, with 22,329. San Francisco had the most housing units completed per capita of the 6 largest California cities, those cities with 500,000 people or more. We had the second most units completed per capita of the 13 cities with 300,000 residents. We ranked 7th out of 72 California cities, the top 10, with populations larger than 100,000. And it makes sense to evaluate San Francisco's housing production in terms of land area. And given our constrained land area, we actually, if you do it based on land area, are number 1. So those are things that I think we need to be aware of as this narrative is beaten upon us. And San Francisco also has a lot of local things that other municipalities don't have. We lead the state on rent control. We have done more around the development of affordable housing than virtually any other municipality in the state. And before I shut up and turn it over to our panelists for the next hour, let me leave you with this. Aggressive state preemption of housing, land use, and urban planning really has a singular purpose: remove all constraints on private capital, no matter the consequences. And on the surface, we may agree with the so-called GIMBYs on many things: missing middle housing types, parking light development types, dense walkable neighborhoods. But these goals are undermined by much of what the state is forcing upon us, like state density bonus, which also unilaterally waives parking maximums and open space and incentives, and incentivizes the building of skyscrapers, which you could call unaffordable by design. We also agree on the importance of producing housing which meets the needs of workers and families. But the state's approach is not successful affordable housing policy. Market rate development does not create good urbanism on its own or affordability by design. Market rate development in dense, geographically constrained urban environments will never be affordable without some kind of governmental intervention. And we should talk about that. I am an unabashed supporter of our local efforts around creation of affordable housing. So here's a shameless plug for Proposition A, the $300 million general obligation bond that will not raise your taxes, that is on our ballot on March 5th. And with that, why don't I turn it over to our first panelist, Kyle Smeallie. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor, and thank you for having me today. I'm Kyle Smeallie. I am currently, for the next 3 weeks, the Chief of Staff for Supervisor Dean Preston. But as the Supervisor said, I will be transitioning to the San Francisco Community Land Trust starting in March. And for those who don't know, the Land Trust is a nonprofit that specializes in buying buildings, putting them that are on the private market and turning them into permanently affordable housing. The project you mentioned was actually the very first project the Land Trust ever did back in 2009 on Columbus Avenue. But I have been in City Hall for the past 6 years, focused on issues pertaining to land use, anti-displacement, and I've seen from the inside, I think, an incredible shift of Sacramento to take away power from local communities, local elected officials, local decision-making bodies. So next slide, please. So let's talk about sort of where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. And I'm going to try to demystify and explain some of these concepts and players. The housing element, which I'll get into in the next slide, which is enforced by the State Housing and Community Development Department, which is based on regional production goals. And sort of the impetus from Sacramento, especially in the past 5 to 10 years, has been to pass a massive amount of legislation that really takes away a lot of the local control and power. Next slide. So starting in 1969, the state has required cities to incorporate into their general plans targets for housing production. And this comes in the form of what's known as the housing element. This is updated every 8 years, and it's based on a state process called the Regional Housing Needs Assessment or Allocation, RHNA, that identifies the total number of units that you have to produce. And at this point, I think it's important to sort of step back and say, there's a big difference between market rate housing and affordable housing. I think a lot of folks are aware of this, but for-profit housing is built by developers to maximize profits. Affordable housing is subsidized by the government, and there's restrictions on how much rent you can charge, how much you can resell it for. And I raise that because the constraints and the barriers for those two things are very, very different. So next slide, let's look at our most recent RHNA cycle. This was the housing production goal between 2015 and 2022. So it called for San Francisco to produce just under 30,000 units. A little more than 16,000 of them are affordable, a little more than 12,000 market rate. So how did we do? We ended up absolutely exceeding our market rate goals by 10,000 units. And when it came to affordable housing, we did an abysmal job. We barely hit 50%. So that was our production in the past RHNA cycle. And I really think it highlights this trickle-down theory, which is more of a myth, right? That if we build enough of the luxury market rate units, suddenly at some point they will become affordable. And that really is the ideology that underpins a lot of the sort of YIMBY movement, and it's the driving force of a lot of the change in Sacramento. But the fact is, it doesn't work. You have to build housing that's affordable for people. It doesn't just magically happen from the market. So let's move to our current RHNA goals. This is what was just adopted in 2023. What we see here is a massive increase in the targets across the board by a factor of 3. So from our previous RHNA cycle, we went from 12,000 market rate. Now we have to build 35,000 market rate. For affordable, we go from 16,000 to 46,000. Now, it's important to stop here and highlight that when it comes to meeting these affordable goals, there's no plan, not at the local level, not at the state level, not at the federal level, to meet those goals. It's estimated that we need $19 billion to actually hit those targets. So from my perspective, we're seeing these huge inflated numbers, and it fuels a massive deregulation agenda. And it forces the city to change the laws to meet these market rate goals, but we have accepted complete failure for affordable housing targets. And when it comes to these numbers, there's a lot of questions that have come up. There was actually an audit done in March of 2022 that found that the Housing and Community Development Department has no formal review process for the data it uses to determine its needs assessments. So it's questions about the input of where we're getting these targets. They also found that it did not adequately consider certain factors when creating these needs assessments, including vacancy rates, right? Those are very important. We've got tens of thousands of vacant homes in the city, and there was an allegation that they didn't actually take those into account. So let's talk about some of the punitive measures that we've seen from Sacramento. They have been very aggressive about highlighting where, in their view, the Board of Supervisors needs to move more quickly to adopt policies that meet the market rate goals. They issue warning letters that say if we don't take certain actions under certain timelines, they'll take away affordable housing money. They also use a tool called pro-housing designation and say if we don't pass enough laws that streamline market rate, we will lose that designation and then lose transportation funding, lose housing funding. There's also a concept called the builder's remedy, which says if we don't meet certain production goals, they basically will step in and allow any private development to be approved by right without any chance for public input. And they've even gone so far as to say they could take over our planning department. And so, as part of the housing element compliance, the mayor has proposed a major upzoning policy that would apply across the city. There was just an informational hearing at the Planning Commission this past week. I know a lot of folks were there and really speaking with some concerns about the process. And the next few slides will actually visualize what some of this looks like. Next slide. All right, so this is what it would look like at Lombard and Divisadero. You can see massive change here. Next slide. This is the current Marina Safeway site. Again, it's a major change that would not be including the community in these discussions. Next slide. And this is Erie and Masonic. Now, I will say just from where I sit, we're not against increasing development capacity, but we believe strongly that it has to be done in consultation with the community, not imposed on the community. We also think that if the goal here is to comply with the housing element, the very least, the starting point should be that these should be 50% affordable, because that's what they're requiring us under the housing element. That's how we need to comply. And then I'll highlight just one ordinance that has caused a lot of issues. It's the state density bonus program. It's a policy that says if you do a little extra in terms of affordable units, you give additional concessions, the city will allow you to build taller. And critically, you get fast-tracked through the process, and there's very little opportunity for community input. And I think that's a really stark example of how community voices have been legislated out of the equation, and money really is the only thing that talks, especially in Sacramento. And this is the vision of elected officials like Scott Wiener, the union movement, and really it takes our voice out of the process. So it seems like capital is winning, and they're starting to build. We need to fight back. We want to drive home that these laws are passed, and this is happening now. And then I'll end on this slide. A remarkable admission a couple weeks ago at the Planning Commission. And I'll start by saying it's frustrating that the pro-developer crowd has really co-opted the language around equity and housing justice, and it makes it really confusing for the average person to know what's going on. So this was a mask-off moment when the executive director of the Housing Action Coalition actually said out loud, "We need the rent to go back up." And it says everything, right? This is about profits for developers, not housing for people. They take away the community voice by calling it a housing constraint. They lower or completely remove requirements for affordable housing by saying there are restrictions that block housing. And the worst part is right now they're winning. And we need community to stand up, get involved, and fight back. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. Yeah, that was a pretty good moment, or pretty real moment when Mr. Smith said that, and I think that tweet that my former staff Lee Hepner sent out has now been viewed over 200,000 times. With that, we will go to Fernando Marti.
Thank you. Maybe I will stand because I don't have access to my slides. So as Kyle and Supervisor Peskin said, we are in a moment in which the state is attacking our ability to build, to have a say in what gets built, and at the same time the state is cutting funding and acting in the context of ongoing fund cutting to affordable housing. What you see here is this $19 billion gap. Now, as Kyle said before, the state HCD, based on a law passed by or sponsored by State Senator Scott Wiener, tripled the goals that the city was required to build for affordable and market rate housing. The tripling of those goals were supposed to be looking back at what we had not built in the past. So as Kyle pointed out, what we had not built in the past was affordable housing. So you might expect that the affordable housing goal might be increased. That is not what happened. The law as it came out was a law that said we're going to look at how many people are rent burdened, paying too much rent, or overcrowded. And we're going to incorporate that into our analysis. And that gave us this number that is 3 times as big. Who is rent burdened? Who is living in overcrowded conditions? Nonetheless, we get this tripling of the number, including a tripling of the affordable housing goals. And when you look at the amount that we spend, the city typically spends about $250,000 per unit to build a new unit of housing. Multiply that by the new goals and you get $19 billion that we should have in place. Now, if you think the state comes down and says, here's your new goals and here is the money for that, I've got some real estate in the Everglades to sell you guys, or maybe in the marsh overseen by the Coastal Commission. Oh wait, I may be able to do that now. Anyway, let's go on. This is all happening in the context of a historic shift going on since the days of Nixon, but in particular since the days of Ronald Reagan, of ever less direct federal funding and even indirect federal funding for affordable housing. So what you see there is the comparison from 1962 of federal spending for transportation versus federal spending for housing. Next slide. So meanwhile, the same HCD, this is the State Housing and Community Development Department, that has created these new goals, tripling the goals for both market rate and affordable, is going through slashing any and all funding that the state has to build affordable housing. You see on here a $250 million cut to the multifamily housing. One of the biggest things that is heartburn to me is over the last few years, there was a concerted effort to create this new program called FIP, ostensibly around foreclosures, but really about preserving people's existing housing. Whether that is a single family home that is facing foreclosure, or whether that is an apartment building that is about to be lost to an Ellis Act or an OMI eviction. That funding that we thought we had won is now being cut. And as Supervisor Peskin mentioned before, Kyle is now going to be working at the San Francisco Community Land Trust. The efforts of organizations like the Land Trust, different from other housing organizations, are less to build new housing, which is an important, critical goal, but to preserve people's housing where they are. And meanwhile, we have Governor Newsom cutting $247 million out of this program. Next slide. Just go to the next ones. And then we have what we are doing locally. So I will talk a little bit in a moment about Prop A, vote for Prop A in March. But from our local city administration, that is really the only way we fund affordable housing. Bonds are nice because we're not really taxing anyone. You'll see down here it says no new taxes. Many of us argue that this bond maybe should have been larger, but the limitation, the bond is $300 million, is based on not increasing anybody's property taxes. There were other funds, such as Proposition I. Folks remember Proposition I in 2019 or 2020 was a new transfer tax that applied to properties over $10 million in sales, so a lot of commercial properties, really large apartment buildings. That funding was supposed to go to affordable housing. Instead, maybe we're increasing police staffing or other uses, despite the fact that a campaign and structures put around that funding were meant to go to affordable housing. We'll talk a little bit more about market rate housing, but one of the things that you often hear from that representative from the HAC, the Housing Action Coalition that was on the picture before, is that the way to build affordable housing is to build lots more market rate housing. We have inclusionary housing that is a requirement on really large developers to build some portion of their housing as affordable. That is just can we get a little bit out of these guys and all of the profit that they are making and the profit that the landowners are making? This is not a solution to $19 billion in shortfall to affordable housing. And then we've got all other tax cuts. So let's move to the next slide. So what do we need? Next slide. Here I'm just going to talk about some of the things that are in stages of ferment, stages of a lot of activism, a lot of folks who are working on these, and we hope that you are part of it, and if not, that you will join in the conversations and in the work towards creating some of these solutions. Remember, these are solutions that we are trying to do here in San Francisco despite the cuts to federal funding, despite the cuts that Governor Newsom is doing to state funding. One of those things is to create a new system of municipal social housing, creating social housing, affordable housing for a wide range of incomes. So thinking about thinking about what public housing was meant to be when it was first laid out in the 1930s and 40s as housing for a general working and middle class of people who could not afford the market rate. That's not what we ended up with for a lot of reasons, some of it good reasons. There are people who are on the verge of homelessness. We need to be spending on housing to keep those folks housed. I'm somebody who makes right at the median income of San Francisco. I mean, half the people in San Francisco earn more than me, half the people earn less. If it weren't for affordable housing, I would never be able to stay in the city after I was evicted after 24 years of no doubt. There are organizations that are starting to grow across the state, and the Community Land Trust movement is one of those that are not necessarily new. They came out of organizing in the American South as former sharecroppers came together and said, why can't we own our land together and build housing on there? And the movement has grown over the decades. In San Francisco, we have a community land trust that really focuses on preserving people's housing. But it is a movement that is growing across the state, despite the cuts to funding to make these things happen. And we have a long history of housing cooperatives or mutual housing associations where residents create their own nonprofits. So I lay these out as sort of there's a lot of work that is happening, and we need to fight for the funding to make it happen. At the same time, and we often talk about this in the housing movements as the 3 Ps. We need to preserve housing, we need to produce housing, but the first thing that we need to do is to protect folks where they are. Protect tenants, especially in San Francisco. Also protect low-income homeowners. We are stymied by state laws. So we have the Costa-Hawkins law, and there are efforts every few years to repeal Costa-Hawkins. Costa-Hawkins is the law that does not allow us to have real rent control. I don't know how many folks here live in a rent-controlled apartment. Rent control was an incredible victory in San Francisco. It was a victory that followed the victory to the landowners from Prop 13. As folks may know the story, part of the campaign for Prop 13 from big landlords was, past Prop 13, my taxes will be frozen and I will not raise your rents. And then the following year the rents went up again and folks rebelled and said, well, you got yours, we're going to get rent control. But Costa-Hawkins was a law that was passed that did not allow us to have the kind of rent control that would stabilize communities over time. It stabilizes individual families, at least until somebody comes along and telesacks their building or doesn't have a one of the things that San Francisco has been really great at, we passed a lot of pro-tenant laws. We passed a right to counsel legislation here in San Francisco, and there are continuing fights around that. We have free legal counsel for tenants fighting displacement. That is not the case across the region, and one of the conversations happening is, can we expand what San Francisco has done across the region? And stability for tenants means also stability for their communities, their cultural assets, their retail. And so we're seeing a lot of that, despite pressure against it, to develop new cultural and historic districts in San Francisco in a way that was never has never happened until the last 10 years. So I'll talk a little bit about funding sources. As I said, the city is very reliant on general obligation bonds. So folks, I don't know if folks how familiar you are with bonds, but it's basically a loan paid back through our property taxes. And when this says no new taxes, it's because we're paying it back based on paying off the previous loans that the city has done. There is a challenge with bonds that they require a 2/3 vote, a big threshold to pass, which is why vote for Prop A in March. But it also means that the kinds of things that you can do with a bond, we have to get everyone together, a whole, from the right to the left in the city. In November, we're going to have, at least I think we're going to have, a regional bond for between $10 and $20 billion on the ballot. I put a little bit of information about that. Folks, we can talk about that later. I don't want to get into the details of it. But imagine passing, so San Francisco, as you've heard, has been at the cutting edge of affordable housing over and over again across the state. Imagine trying to pass a regional bond, passing it in Solano County and Nevada and other places. San Francisco is going to have to carry a big part of the weight of that if it's going to happen. So this is the state.
We can't hear you back here.
Sorry, so this is the state and the federal government kind of abdicating their responsibility for affordability, their responsibility for stabilizing our communities, and us at the local and regional level working to replace that. As I said, the bonds are the things that are in some ways, even though they require a large threshold, they're the ones that are easier to do. We're not talking about a new tax. And San Francisco voters have not had a problem with passing new taxes on large property owners, such as Proposition I, a transfer tax on properties over $10 million. There have been conversations about a landlord tax, as was passed in Berkeley and East Palo Alto. There are conversations about why this city, unlike many other cities, mostly on the east coast of the U.S., does not use revenue bonds to build real workforce housing. It's a conversation that I think we're trying to elevate more, which is not a tax. Question is, how do we make that work here? What's the infrastructure? There is a very live conversation about creating a municipal bank in San Francisco. Why do we have to go to Bank of America or Wells Fargo for our cities, for keeping our cities' reserves, when we have billions of dollars that can be used to reinvest in our own city? There is a task force that was created, a whole business plan that's been created, and that is slowly moving its way through the wheels of the city government. I'll just finish with the idea of tax increment districts. Part of what allowed San Francisco to build so much affordable housing in the 80s and 90s was that we had a commitment through, despite the evils of the redevelopment agency, back when we had some state representatives who maybe cared a little bit more, a commitment that was passed through state legislation through Burton, that redevelopment agency was going to spend money to replace the 6,000 units of housing that were destroyed in the Western Addition and the Fillmore. And so the city was spending millions of dollars through that tax increment. Governor Brown, as folks remember, in 2011, got rid of the redevelopment agencies, some places probably for good. In San Francisco, it was a huge setback. But one of the conversations happening is, can we create other versions of tax increment financing? Next slide, that may be it. Who's following on this? All right.
Thank you, Fernando. That was very instructive. Can you hear me back there? Okay, Lori will speak into the microphone. Nick, what were you about to say?
I just want to highlight, if folks have questions, please, if you need a note card, I can give it to you, or stand at the back end. And if you have any questions, please hand them to us as well.
Great, and while Nick is picking up the note cards, let me say, when I was harking back to redevelopment and harking back to the Fontana Towers and the I Hotel, the city leaders responded to neighborhood activism, and San Francisco has had a very robust, wonderful history of neighborhood activism that has actually gotten mayors and members of boards of supervisors to put everyday citizens on commissions. So there are a bunch of those folks in this audience, and I just want to thank and acknowledge people like Esther Marks and Catherine Moore, who currently serves on our planning commission, even though it is frustrating, and Dennis Richards, who used to serve on our planning commission for your service, and also and Courtney Damkroger, who was on our historic preservation commission. And I want to acknowledge all the activism that is in this room that Lori represents, folks like Ozzy Ram, Kathy Howard, Hanmin and Jennifer Liu from the Upper Chinatown neighborhood organizations, affordable housers like the Chinatown Community Development Center, Whitney Jones and Tan Chow are here. And to say that what we're doing in this room is very important, because it is the neighborhood activism as expressed through this thing called elections that influences people like me, and I want to acknowledge that there are candidates for office in this room, a couple of them for District 3, Sharon Lai, Mo Jamil, one for District 7, Matt Bischetto. So thank you for coming and hearing this perspective. I think that is very important. and Howard Wong from the District 3 Democratic Club that had all of the issues and candidates come down. So that is the bread and butter of, I think, what makes democracy that is being eroded by the state work here in San Francisco, and that is a good introduction to Lori Brooks and Neighborhoods United San Francisco. Lori.
Thank you. So I'm going to stand here so I can twist my neck back and forth. Just a little bit about me. My parents were born and met and married and had me in San Francisco, and I went into third grade in San Mateo. They were part of that exodus that left in the early 70s. But I love this city deeply. And as I've gotten more involved with neighborhood activism, because I'm the president of the Cow Hollow Association, I realized how much I love it. And as people say they want to move out now, they're upset about homelessness, they're upset about crime, or they don't want to, they can't afford to live here, that just makes me dig in deeper. Because I know what a special city we have, and it's worth fighting for. So through my role at the Cow Hollow Association was the growth of Neighborhoods United SF, because I obviously knew a lot of different neighborhood associations through that role, and also a part of Rescue SF. And we started to build this coalition to push back on, at this moment in time, which is the upzoning plans that you guys briefly saw earlier. So a little bit about us. Oh, yeah. Just kind of assume when I need to go next. Otherwise I'll be going next. We came into being to challenge the upzoning premises and strategies of the plans that the city has put forth right now. We are urging an approach that truly delivers affordable housing, as you've already heard from this panel, that a lot of the plans that are underway will not deliver the housing that people want. And I want to just a little shout out to the YIMBY-NIMBY narrative. I think we have far more in common than not. If, I called them the other day the XIMBY, where we cross over, because if we work together to get you the affordable housing that you really want, it will happen, but if we spend time fighting over it, it won't. So I just want to put that out into the universe and find ways to stop fighting and start working together. So we want to insist on protections for our neighborhood, character, quality of life, and the existing rent-controlled housing stock. We want to prevent the encroachment of towering luxury condos that actually raise median prices. We have a lot of those. You drive around the city at night and you'll see most of those condos often are dark. And if you look online, you'll find most of them are for sale. And in the luxury condos, another little gotcha is the cost of the homeowner's dues. So you might pay $2 million to get in there. Now you pay $1,200 a month, your homeowner's dues. It's the furthest thing from affordable. And yet that's been what is put forth with the plans of the zoning planning department right now. And then here's an important part, and that's the protection of our commercial corridors against gentrification and the transformation into darkened, cold, and windy spaces. The ironic crossover is that part of the state's decision and our city's decision to put the upzoning plans, they're on commercial corridors. Commercial corridors make sense in transit corridors because you're figuring, well, people can just leave their place, go to the sidewalk, get on the bus, and go somewhere. But the reality is those commercial corridors are where a lot of our small businesses are located. And if you start to, I'm hearing it already from people on Lombard Street. They're like, I can't wait for this to happen because I am selling this building and I am out of here. Because all of a sudden their 40-foot height limit today now will be 85 feet. Their property value just significantly increased. They want to sell it and they want to go. So who's ever living in the building, even though the planning department says we won't, force anyone out of their property, we've seen that happen in the past. But moreover, that small business on the ground floor, they won't survive. They won't survive as they redo the building. And there goes the charm of our commercial corridors. Next slide. Okay, so our critique of the upzoning plans are the following: that they're misguided, that the excessive height increases in the established historic neighborhoods, and this is what I want to just point out. They're like shoehorning a lot of these plans into established, historic, iconic, charming neighborhoods. There's the proper place for affordable housing, and most likely it has to be done on a site-specific basis. You can't take a red or yellow highlighter and just go up and down Taraville from one end to the other, or up and down Judah, or Irving, or Lombard, or all of Fisherman's Wharf, and cross your fingers that you wake up in 8 years from now and voila, affordable housing. It doesn't work that way. But if you look at that plan, it's highly aggressive. I mean, it's highlighter hell for those of us that have to quote that one. My mom will be like, that's bad language. It's unnecessary. Okay. We have, roughly 40,000 units that are vacant right now. We have, aggressive and existing and sometimes very effective upzoning that's already occurred. If you go onto the map and look what the city's doing, there is a button that will show you the upzoning they did for 4 and 6 plexes. That would generate capacity of about 480,000 units. Of course, it would never all be built. But just take a fraction of a fraction of a fraction, and you start to get closer to what we need to hit for these somewhat excessive RENA numbers. Next is it's excessive, and that's the pipeline. I think it was already discussed earlier that how our RENA numbers are significantly higher than they've been in the past. And actually, the 72,000 is actually down to 36,000, half of which needs to be affordable because the state allowed us to apply some of the current pipeline to the 72,000. So we're actually down to 36,000, but still 15,000 have to be affordable. Punitive, and again, this was discussed earlier, that not only, if we don't hit the numbers that have been by most experts deemed unattainable, that we will then fall into a position of being punished as a city, or any city in California for that matter. But San Francisco seems to be in the unique target of some of our state legislators. We are the only city in all of California that after 1 year versus 4 years gets assessed as to our progress towards meeting our RENA goals. Why us? After what you've heard so far about how effective we've been in producing housing, why would we be the singular target? So that's a question out there. I don't even know if that's legal. But and then which leads to the builder's remedy. And then finally, that we talked about the RENA numbers are inflated. They're setting us up for failure because that will then, of course, roll to being the builder's remedy. Next slide. Oh, one more. Ineffective. Oh, here's a little thing I learned along the way. I was like, so how, if you're going to build these luxury condos, 8 stories, 14 stories that have views from the Farallones to Mount Diablo, how does that translate to affordable housing? They said, well, the impact fees that the developer has to pay for that project, they go to build affordable housing elsewhere. So we're piggy banks, right? And not that that's a horrible idea, but it's not a very well managed idea. How do you effectively manage if that stuff even gets built? And what's left behind? That's not the affordable housing in these communities that is needed. It's very expensive luxury condos. So what does Neighborhood United SFs ask of the city? Be sensible. Stop the unnecessary upzoning and provide the state capacity plans that are commensurate with the actual 30,000 units. We've kind of rolled over. The state has, wagged their finger at us and they said, you got to do this or else. And we've been like, okay. Well, no, not okay. It's not okay because the numbers, the original RENA numbers, you can't even really find a proper metric of how they calculated it. There's a lot of assumptions and a lot of fluff because they know, well, if I do it really big and they only come back with a little, we might get close. But the point is, all these laws trickle down and all these numbers trickle down from an inflated number. Pause. With the current upzoning plans right now, we want the city to start with reasonable plans. You start with something that's reasonable, see how it works, be iterative, and do it over time. Don't, Commissioner Moore, you were brilliant. If I could just repeat the words you said at the Planning Commission the other day, it's like invasive surgery. They're just tearing the corpus open, and they're like, good luck. I hope we can fix this person in the end. When they're going to bleed out. What you need to do is, neighborhoods need a plan. They need a nuanced plan if you're going to build affordable housing in those communities. Think about the topography. Think about the existing homes that are there. Think about the vacancies that are there. Think about that community and build something so that you can put in affordable housing so folks that want to live here can afford to live here. But the highlighting the city with different colored pens, there's no way you can manage and predict what will come out of that. Think about this number too. I was a math major, but I'm horrible at math. 82,000, if you just say, okay, 2.5 people per unit, that's 204,000 people in San Francisco. Is that right? Roughly. Okay, so we're 800 and something thousand now. 25% increase in our population. That's a lot. We're a small city, water on 3 sides, and we are one of the most dense cities in the country. Why do we take the burden of a 25% increase in our population? And where is the infrastructure money to support it? There isn't. This is an unfunded mandate. There is no money for police, for fire, for parks, for transit, sewage, whatever, water, all of it. There's no funding associated with these plans. Just jam in another 200,000 people. Good luck to you, see you later. It's only going to make things more chaotic than we already feel the city is. Meaningful neighborhood awareness. So that's why we started. Everyone we asked, we said, do you know that they're upzoning the city and it's all going to look quite different? They're like, no. Just aghast. And so we thought, okay, let's get all the neighborhood associations. Right now there's probably about 45 of us across the city that are working together to understand the problem, suggest better ideas to planning, and to let all of you know what's going on and give you a place to participate. So if you go to nusf.net, neighborhoodsunitedsf.net, you can easily email the commissioners and the planners and the mayor and all the powers that be. But moreover, then if you just get updates, we can keep you aware of what important things that are coming up. Because I think if we don't stay engaged, the wears down. So we need to, this is a long haul, but I think together we can make a difference. We want verification on the RENA numbers. I think a lot of folks have already addressed the fact that they're way out of whack and they have been questioned, but not questioned enough. And redo the planning survey. Okay, so I don't know how many of you took the survey. There was a survey that the planning department set out, and I'm not demonizing these folks. They have the hammer over their head to get to these numbers in some way, shape, or form. We just don't agree on how they chose to get there. They sent out a survey asking what your opinion is. And the survey we felt was a bit biased and kind of led to the answers that they wanted. And they admitted it. They said, well, not doing this is not an option, so we're not going to put that on there. So we just filled in all the comments sections with what we really thought. But in a way, it really, if you put your opinions in the comments section, it's not quantitative. So when they go to the planners, they go to the board of supervisors, and they say, "This is what everyone wants." It's only calculated on the responses that were calculatable. Okay, I'm almost done. She's never given me the mic. Big mistake. Actions. So on our site, you can send a letter to planning and elected officials. Advocacy, ensure that your supervisor supports where you're going. Because this is mainly happening in districts 3, 2, 1, 4, 7, and 8. It's kind of the northern and western side of the city. They've done a lot of upzoning, of course, already on the eastern side and southern side. We launched the website that you can go to and you can read about the stuff. You can share it with people that don't know much. That's the most important thing you can do today. We're going to go to that Breck commercial, you tell 2 friends, and they tell 2 friends, and they tell, that's what needs to happen. But tell 10 friends, okay? And it'll go like fire. That's what this needs. It needs awareness. Notice, urge the city, we had asked the city, can you please just let us all know about this? Do we really have to do this? And they said, well, it's not a legislative matter or something like that. And so they don't have to do that, so they haven't. Outreach, so we'll have flyers and newsletters and all that to keep you informed if you sign up so you'll know what's going on. And the timeline. So we had the first Planning Commission hearing last week on February 1st where they showed the upzoning plans and the reasons for them. And the Planning Department has said that they are open to conversations. They want to hear from people. They want to hear from district supervisors and from residents and neighborhood associations. So feel free to tell them. They're there to listen to you. Now, if your opinion reflects into the new plans, I can't say, but I think they need to hear from us. And let's collaborate. Okay, awareness, have we talked about? Legal, is there, any legal option here? Are we really hamstrung? I always say, I feel like as a neighborhood associations, and we've been fighting SB 8, SB 9, SB 11, SB 2850, but you didn't have a number. We've been fighting it. It's a whack-a-mole. Well, that was a red herring. We're running over there after all these little state bills. things were happening behind the curtains. So I think I was playing checkers, and state legislators were playing 4D chess, and they're on the verge of checkmate. But we're not going to let that happen. Media, engage with the media outlets. So we're finally starting to get some press. A Chronicle, or two articles so far in the Chronicle that actually talked about the upzoning plans. So that's a good sign. And when, if our back's up against the wall and those zoning plans keep coming back, more and more highlights or whatever they turn it into, and it's still far from acceptable, then we have to start to take matters into our own hand, and that's when we maybe move towards a San Francisco ballot measure. And then if that, I think that would be successful, because I just think San Francisco residents, when they know more about this, will not be happy. And finally, if that doesn't work, we have to make it the final bulwark, which would be a California ballot measure. And that's the perfect segue to you.
That is the perfect segue to Jovita Mendoza. And just so that you know, this is not only a San Francisco phenomenon, this is a statewide phenomenon. And so, Susan Candell from Marin County is in the audience today, and there are folks, I'm getting calls from people in Los Angeles, all the way up to Crescent City on the Oregon border. This is not just a San Francisco phenomenon, which is a perfect segue to our neighborhood voices.
Hello everyone, and thank you for having me. Just a little bit about me. My name is Jovita Mendoza. I am a first-generation Mexican-American, dual citizen, very proud. And my parents came over when they were 17 and 18 years old. They worked in the fields. They got deported twice off the fields, kept coming back, finally gained their residency when my older sister was born. There's 6 of us in the family. We grew up pretty poor. We grew up in East Oakland. So again, my dad was a field worker first. Then he became a janitor. Then he became a roofer, and that's been his career ever since then. So we grew up, like I said, poor, and as we grew up, we all had, the 6 kids all had the different wants for what we wanted when we grew up. I moved to Brentwood, California when I got married, and I moved to Brentwood because I knew I wanted a single family home. And I had grown up on a flag lot with apartments around us and a lot of homes, and things like fighting for parking happened. Guns got pulled out for parking in East Oakland. If you want to go to East Oakland, hang out with me, where you have a lot of high density, and people are fighting for parking, let me know, we can go hang out. But, so I ran for office in Brentwood, California, because we were one of the fastest growing cities in California in the 90s and the 2000s. And they kept building and building and building. And one of the things that really bothered me was that they were trying to build over their open space. Growing up in Oakland, we had one park on 98th Avenue, and Bancroft was the closest park. We couldn't use the park because it was a dirty site. It had chemicals from a battery factory. So I'm really big on open space. And when they wanted to build over our open space, I was really mad. And my husband said, well, if you want to do something about it, run for office. So I have no political background at all whatsoever. I'm actually a financial analyst and an econ person. That's what I do for a living. And when I started seeing these numbers, they're all false. Our population is declining. We actually have a ton of short-term rentals. We have a lot of housing out there, and I don't think we need to build more. So I ran for office and I won, which actually I was pretty shocked about. So I then heard about all these bills from the state legislators, and I think they're absolutely insane. They take away our rights as American citizens to have a say in what happens in our country. And it is very authoritarian, so I don't like it, because again, I told you I was a Mexican American, and I can see what happens in other countries when the government starts telling you what to do. So I want to make sure that in America we all keep having a say. So I joined Our Neighborhood Voices, and I think Kyle had mentioned all of the bills. So since 2017, 150 bills, and they're going to produce affordable housing. Psych, didn't happen. Yimmy doesn't know what they're doing, and they don't know how to write bills, because if they did, we'd have a lot more affordable housing. So we can try to fight every single bill, one by one, or we can pass the constitutional amendment that says you as a city can build what you want, what your residents want, and if you want to keep any of these bills on your books, go ahead and keep them if they work for you, and if you don't, you can remove them. So, so what the constitutional amendment does, when we pass it, the day it passes, you will be able to start deciding what you want in your neighborhoods. And to do this, we're raising funds, and we're all creating our own coalition, like, your Neighborhoods United coalition. So what's been happening with these bills? So I think you've all seen this building. And this is all thanks to your Scott Wiener. So here's the thing about this. I think this is elitist, and I think it's actually racist. Because these neighborhoods are not built for poor people, and they are not built for people of color. And Kalima and I talk about it all the time. What they want, what they give us, is things like density bonus, where they build stack 'em and pack 'em housing, and they stick us all in high density housing. Because poor people don't deserve backyards, right? Poor people don't deserve, to have parking and not have to fight for it. So this is what Scott Wiener's done. And actually in San Francisco, there's been people that have said that the removal of parking is actually very, very elitist. If you are a mom with a child, how do you get them to their activities? How do you get groceries home? You have 6 kids. Do you know how many gallons of milk my mom had to bring home from the grocery store? Like, there's no way you could do that on public transit. So I think it is a privilege to work around public transit and be able to commute there and back and not have to do anything else. So, yeah, I'm not a big fan of Scott Wiener when it comes to the housing front. So his latest attempt, I don't know how many of you have heard about SB 951? Do you all like your beaches? Forget it. Scott doesn't care that you like your beaches. He's not going to start building high-rises, so hello Miami, all over California. So this is his plan. Him and Skinner and Atkins and Buffy Wicks and all of them, high density is their plan. And if they want to do it, I think it's fine. But they should ask you if that's what you want for your neighborhood, and that's the part that's missing. I think anything should be proposed if you're considering it, but when you take away the voice of the people, that's the problem in my book. So this is going through the state legislators right now. So how do we solve affordability? I think every city's going to have to do their own thing. Fernando had some great ideas for San Francisco. In our city, another reason I ran is because our city council was not building affordable housing. And we have a huge field worker population. So what we did is we actually said no more in lieu fees for anything under 9 units. And they have to build, right now it's 13% affordable housing. I got them to pass 13% in every single new development. And we have developments where the houses are going for over $1 million. And you have 13% affordable housing. So we just had a family of 8 of field workers, 3 generations, move from a trailer into a $1 million neighborhood. Now what that means for their future generations is that those children will now go to better schools and be exposed to different people in the community that have different careers and be able to improve themselves. But I don't think that is what's happening under the current housing laws that are happening. They're keeping us segregated, which I think is Wiener's ultimate goal, to keep us segregated. And I'm not happy with it. So we want affordable housing, and it needs to work in your neighborhood. I think we do need some kind of redevelopment agency back. I think that we need, I would say, 20% across the state inclusionary affordable housing. People say it doesn't pencil out, but I've been reading P&Ls. Developers are making higher rate, more pennies to the bank. So they're doing just fine. I'm not worried about their P&Ls. So that is it. So they'll have to, in our initiative, we do have some requirements for affordable housing. So we can go to the next slide now. And we've met with people here in San Francisco. We align with Rep SF. Trickle-down housing is not working. And that's what all of these bills are doing, is demanding trickle-down housing, and they think it's going to work. And it's just not. If it did, we would have seen some kind of result by now. We're not seeing it. Housing is getting more and more expensive in California, and it's all thanks to Scott Wiener and his bills. Okay, so what do we need from you today? So we have an initiative, and what we need today is we need volunteers. We need money, because every single initiative takes money to pass it in Sacramento. You need money to collect signatures, to do your marketing and all that good stuff. And we need you to please tell people about our initiative. People don't know that there is a solution, the constitutional amendment, that will actually overturn all of these if that's what you want in your city. But at the end of the day, it's about Americans in California getting a say in what gets built in their neighborhood. I mean, to me, that is what's important to me. That's why my parents came to this country, so that they had a say. And I just think that what's going on is wrong, 100% wrong. So That's where I stand on it. And I hope you can please help us with our neighborhood voices. Please follow us on all social media. Please share the information with your friends. We need as many people to get involved, and we need to vote out bad actors and vote in people that really care about us, the people, and not their special interest donors. Woo!
Thank you, Councilmember Mendoza. And relative to Senate Bill 951, which is a bill that would take all of the private land in the west side of San Francisco along the Great Highway that for 51 years since the creation of the California Coastal Commission out of the coastal zone, which means they would no longer be under the jurisdiction of the California Coastal Commission. Senator Wiener sponsored that bill. It is actually rather remarkable insofar as there has been no controversy about development along the Great Highway. There have only in 51 years been 2 appeals of a San Francisco decision from a local decision to the California Coastal Commission, one of them having to do with the artificial turf and lights in the western end of Golden Gate Park, which the Coastal Commission upheld, whether you agree with them or not, the city and county of San Francisco. The reason I'm bringing this up is it is disastrous precedent. If the city of San Francisco can have their state senator remove the Coastal Commission jurisdiction, it is just a matter of time before it happens from Humboldt County to San Diego County, and there goes one of the most cherished, important acts that have celebrated our coastline for a half a century. To that end, tomorrow, at the Land Use Committee of the Board of Supervisors, item number 4, which will be heard around 2:30, is a resolution of opposition to said bill. You are welcome, if not encouraged, to come and testify on that. I am the author of the opposition resolution. So hopefully that will pass, but you are welcome and encouraged to come and testify on behalf of that tomorrow afternoon. So why don't we start with a little bit of a roundtable here, and then we will go to audience questions, of which I have a stack. And much of this has really been touched on in the excellent presentations by the 4 panelists. And so I think it was Lori who said, aren't we being set up to fail? And what is the response from the panelists? Will the city's plan to meet the housing element work? Is this possible? Are the arena goals achievable? And what does it mean if we fail? You want to start, Fernando?
So how many people here know how many units get built in San Francisco every year on average? Yeah, not the planning commissioner. Anybody else? Hazard a guess. Okay, so now we've got a good question. The question was entitled, which means the planning department approved it to get built, or actually built. So my question was, how many actually get built? 10,000. That's a nice number. Since 1960, there have been, I think, 3 years when the annual amount surpassed 5,000 units. That being, I think, when the Fontana Towers were done, 1962, 1963, and then again 2017, 2018, or 2019, sometime around that. A few years. Typically, we build, we being developers and investors who put some money into building, build about 2,000 to 3,000 units per year. Doesn't matter, on average. So that's when the population of San Francisco was falling in the 60s and in the 70s and in the 80s. Population was going down. We were building a little bit. And those RENA goals that we now have are 10,000 units per year. A number that has, maybe was actually in probably 1849, maybe at the gold rush. Maybe there were 10,000, maybe 20,000. So I don't think we're going to meet those goals at all. And it's not that we aren't going to meet those goals. I talked about the $19 billion for the affordable housing, but what about the market rate? Like, how many cranes do folks remember seeing in 2017 around town? And how many cranes do you see now? And is it like suddenly a bunch of NIMBYs got around in 2020 to stop all those cranes? So folks remember the Bill Clinton campaign as campaign manager. It's the economy, stupid, when he was talking to Bush, right? It's not approvals when we have over 40,000 approved units that aren't getting built. It's the investors. So if Scott Wiener wants to do something about it, he can go talk to the investors and maybe something will get built. He might also want to talk to HCD and figure out how to get more funding for affordable housing. And he might actually be able to meet those goals, but that's not what he's doing.
So Nando, I guess, and I realize you are not our state senator, you're not our governor, and maybe Kyle or Jovita, you can take a crack at this, but what's the end game? Which is, if for 65 years we've been building an average of 2,000 to 3,000 units a year, and now there are these goals of 10,000, is this just an end game to basically blow up all local land use controls? Is that what it is?
It definitely is. There is no way. I've looked at every single city in California, and I would say 90% of them will not meet the 50% requirement in the 4 years. So you have to build at every single tier 50% of the requirement. So half of the very low, moderate, and then just your regular housing. There is no way any city's going to make it. So then what happens is that your senator, Scott Wiener, is basically handing over the reins of your planning commission and what your city's going to be to developers. So you won't get a say at all. And they can do as high as they want, as big as they want, no parking. But the end game is, I think, for them to pay back their campaign donors and give them what their campaign donors want, which is full control of development across the state.
All right, well, maybe we will jump to another question, which is, what are the forces and the political dynamics that got us here? I mean, because the YIMBY movement does seem like there are people involved. How did this movement come about? I mean, and who's funding the movement in Sacramento? Because we all know that Sacramento, what do they say? The mother's milk of politics is money. And who's funding the advocacy organizations behind this? Or are these grassroots movements that aren't backed with money? And how did this movement come of age?
Well, I think we're all grassroots, right? We are actually people who live here versus these campaign donors. So your short-term rentals is a big one now, right? They want to build more and more and more. You stay there and you don't stay at a hotel. That's their great. So short-term rentals, if you look at people's donations, developers, if you look at people's donations, real estate companies are huge. They donate a lot, which is interesting because my real estate friends don't like this, but their mothership, their organization seems to like it. But I think until you have campaign finance reform, you're not going to be able to change it because that's who's funding their campaigns, and that's who they go consult for after they leave office.
Lori, what are your thoughts?
San Francisco.
Similar. I feel like, well, one of the phrases I've used is I feel like that our government is not prioritizing the current residents and businesses, but instead everything is about some hypothetical future resident. You're not hypothetical, you're here. But that's why I keep saying to you, I haven't answered your question, but maybe I'll get there. I think that we're not on opposite sides. I have a 25-year-old daughter and a 23-year-old daughter. They want to live here, they want to buy here. They're deep in this because they can't get away from me. And they understand this, and they understand the things that are being proposed in our communities they will never be able to afford. So the current upzoning plans won't give you what you maybe, unless you make a lot of money, and I just don't realize that. But it's not going to build for you what you're dreaming about and what you're arguing for and what you're spending your time doing. Instead, listen to some of the ideas up here and maybe get involved in these things to get yourself some affordable housing. But that's okay if you don't want to. I even forgot the question. I don't think I have a good answer.
I think Kyle's going to take a shot at it.
And I think to the question of sort of where does this come from, I think, from my perspective, there's two sort of main drivers of this ideology. I think one is the real estate industry, who their goal is to make as much money as possible, right? And so every impediment to that is their target, right? But those impediments are things like community input. They're things like having a hearing at City Hall. Those are fundamental to what it takes to build a community. And they're rephrasing or recasting those things as constraints or restrictions. But we think they're actually really fundamental to making a city that works for everyone. I think the other main driver that we've seen here are executives in the tech sector who really just want to remake the city into a gated community for very wealthy people. That to me is not a city, that's definitely not San Francisco, and that's why I think it's so important we have to stand up.
I'll maybe add to that. I think that you all touched on kind of who's behind this, but I think there's a lot of folks who are the base for those folks who are behind that, the base that might vote for a state senator who's giving them a simple solution. Right? You know how that works across the country. There's some guy running for president who wants to give some simple solutions. So the simple solution, like my rent's really high. I want to live in the city, but the rent's really high. What's my simple solution? Let's deregulate. And I come from the tech sector. I love deregulation. I don't like regulations on my website or whatever it is. And that's the folks who buy those simple solutions. It takes a lot of time to go through this slideshow and talk about all the intricacies of how much gets built and how much is not going to get built if you deregulate, because that's not where it is. It's about the economy. Let's sit down and nobody wants to talk about that. I want the simple solution. And I also want the simple enemy. So my brother-in-law saw that I was going to be here. He said, well, that's interesting, but what about Beverly Hills? They don't want to build anything. What about Beverly Hills? This is not about Beverly Hills. But that's the questioning that I think is part of our job, is to get to those truths, right?
Thank you, Fernando. Let me ask a kind of more fundamental question, which may sound heretical, but do we have a housing crisis or do we have an affordability crisis?
Surveying people who have union jobs, so are represented by unions, and they asked them sort of, are you rent burdened? Can you afford to live here? It turned out that 7% of those union workers could afford to live in San Francisco. That to me says that there's a pressing affordable housing crisis. But to say that we are somehow going to address that by building skyscrapers that go for $6,000 a month, like it doesn't solve that problem. So it's an affordability crisis, but I don't think it's necessarily a housing crisis.
I'm not a Sacramento person. I've stayed away from the state assembly, and it's 80 members in the state senate, and it's 40 members, and every once in a while I get involved in a particular bill because it has some local meaning in San Francisco and the work I do here. But there's a plethora of people representing all sorts of communities and schools of thought. And again, I know that nobody here can speak for Wiener or Haney or Ting or what have you, but why is the state's mandate and solution rely really on this trickle-down for-profit model? I mean, why aren't there consideration of other notions? Do you have any sense? Do any of you have any sense of that?
Well, I think it's what I said. It's right. It's they're doing. It's who's pulling the strings. The strings are these special interest investors, campaign investors, who make so much more money on the back end. I've been reviewing P&Ls for developers, and again, higher rate, more pennies to the bank, and America is suffering from this affordability crisis, and they're making more money, and Sacramento doesn't seem to care, right? So they're not governing for us, they're governing for who gives them the biggest amount of money, I think. So I think that's what's going on.
Fernando, I saw you writing a note. Do you want to add anything to that?
Well, I'm waiting for the moment when one of these politicians runs on a campaign for real rent control and fully funding the housing that we actually, not those fake numbers, but the ones that we actually need. Who's going to fund their campaign?
I don't know, I'm not going to run for any of those offices, I can tell you that. All right, we've got about 35 minutes left. You all have been fabulous, and I will just go through these. The first question, and this is the order I received them, says California voters passed Proposition 20. The Coastal Act initiative was actually called the Coastal Zoning Management Initiative. Whoever wrote this, Proposition 20 in 1972. The state legislature passed the Coastal Act of 1976. I happen to know this because I used to be a Coastal Commission member. How is Senator Wiener able to override Proposition 20 and the 1976 Coastal Act with his Senate bill? And the answer is because the Proposition 20 actually was a 5-year test model. It gave the legislature the power to create the boundaries of the coastal zone, which it did in 1976, that exists to this day, and nothing prevents them from amending the zone. And that is why the precedent of Senate Bill 951 is so scary, because no one has touched it since 1976. There have been a handful of border adjustments, mostly technical issues, new cities being incorporated. There have been a handful of weird ones where the legislature adjusted the boundary because there was a piece of property that was half in the zone and half out of the zone. But this is the first time in a half a century that anybody has proposed wholesale slaughter. But God willing, we will win. Why don't people in San Francisco know that Senator Wiener is behind all of the bad laws? Precisely why we are having these educational fora, and precisely why we have elections. Your next election where you can cast a vote in this particular matter is March the 5th. Does the state law mean that the city's 40-foot height limit is no longer applicable? Is it automatic that a developer can go higher? And you guys feel free to jump in. The state laws thus far do not say, San Francisco, your 40-foot height limit has just become 80. We have to take action to do that. But the entire scheme taken together encourages us to do things like that to not be punished. That's one. The second answer is the bonus density laws of the state blow through any current height limits. So on a project-by-project basis, if a developer wants to use state density bonus, they can waive our local height limits. And indeed, we have now seen that with this 267-foot glass and steel tower proposed in the San Francisco Landmark Historic Designated District on the northeast waterfront on the other side of Telegraph Hill, near the Embarcadero. Question for Fernando. Can you please explain how removing density limits in construction with state density will result in buildings much, much taller than what is being proposed in planning's latest upzoning law? If you can't, I can. It's all about form-based density, which is when you use density bonus that allows you, using state law, to waive all local codes. You can take on a big lot the density and squeeze it up into a tower. And so the place where this 267-foot building is proposed is actually zoned 65 feet. But when we decontrol the density, they are able, with form-based density and state density bonus, to squeeze that up into a 267-foot tower.
So one of the things about getting rid of density controls, which is become the standard in San Francisco's planning thinking, is that if you're a developer and you don't have density limits, and I can put 5 studio units on a floor where I could previously put 2 bedrooms, what am I going to do? I'm going to put the 5 studios, or maybe 8 studios if I can squeeze them in, because I'm going to get a lot more rental money or sales for that. And what you're seeing is increasingly housing built for singles and less housing for families.
Thank you, Nando. In 2023, California's Department of Finance estimated San Francisco's current population at about 830,000, down 40,000 from 2020's 870,000. Also, they estimated San Francisco to have 840,000 in the year 2031 and 844,000 in the year 2060. Does the Association of Bay Area Governments estimates of 82,000 new units use these population estimates? I don't know. Kyle, do you know? Because you explained how the regional housing needs assessment goals were cooked, but apparently it's not based on population projections, it was based on rent burden.
I think that's accurate, and my understanding is there's actually different California departments actually have different population projections, and if you look at HCDs, it's way out of whack with what other California departments are saying. But the precise input to get that, I'm not entirely sure, but I think that's accurate.
And the other thing is when we ask for the data so that we can analyze our numbers, HCD won't give it to us, which is, if you're so confident in what you're presenting, why not give me the data? And they just don't want to give it to us.
Fernando, anything you want to add? It is a little Kafkaesque, I have to say. I mean, it's interesting for me as a local legislator to be receiving unsolicited letters from a state agency telling me what I can and can't vote on. I got a letter a few weeks ago saying that an amendment that I had proposed in committee could lead to them decertifying San Francisco. It's pretty wild. I get elected by you, and you can not elect me at the next election. You can recall me in the middle of my term, but I've never had the state of California writing me letters telling me I can't do this and I can't do that. It's pretty wild.
And just to jump in on that, I mean, they're threatening decertification, which means that we would lose affordable housing money. So if we're not sufficiently streamlining market rate luxury housing, they will take away funds, the critical thing that actually produces affordable housing.
Yeah, I actually said the other day at a committee meeting that this reminded me of the story of the kid who kills their parents and then asks for mercy from the court because he's an orphan. Sorry, had to do that. Kyle, this will make you happy. You appear to be one of the younger people in the room. Can you get more younger San Franciscans interested in these issues?
Yes. No, I mean, I do think that, there's a part of this discussion that we haven't touched on that I think is really important, and that is the manner in which the sort of pro-development yippie folks have so controlled the message, right? It's incredible narrative work they've done, and I think part of this is you have to look at the media consolidation that has taken place in this city over the past 5 or 10 years, right? So, the Chronicle has always kind of been a more pro-business outlet, more downtown interests. But the San Francisco Examiner was bought by Clint Riley, who's a real estate mogul. There's the San Francisco Standard, which is owned by Michael Moritz, who's a billionaire private financier. These outlets are controlling the message, and I think it makes it really hard for community voices to have any sort of public input. And that's why when there's like a younger person who moves to the city, all the messaging they're getting is this pro-development, build.
What do we do about that, to change it? That's my question.
Great question. So, I definitely think more young folks have to get involved. I think, how I got involved is through campaigns. So people who have inspiring messages, who you believe in, I think you got to recruit folks to do that. And then the other piece is there's a new project that just launched called the Phoenix Project. And it is an attempt to connect the dots between a lot of these tech executives, a lot of the real estate industry, and to really shine a light on what it does to the public dialogue when it's controlled by these moneyed interests.
They always say in this business, follow the money, and I was actually amazed that the Chronicle published this, but somebody brought to my attention, probably somebody in this room, that the site of the 267-foot proposed building on the northeast waterfront was owned in part by Michael Moritz. And sure enough, The documents are there. You can go to the Secretary of State's website, and yes, indeed, it is true. And it turns out that Michael Moritz owns a lot of real estate in San Francisco. And this was actually in the Chronicle the week before last. This is the same person who's funding Together SF and Abundant SF and all of these grassroots organizations that are actually AstroTurf organizations whose members and staff are all paid handsome salaries. And it's right there for us to see. And it actually, I was blown away that the Chronicle actually ran that. Sorry, Lori, for cutting you off.
Please. I just want to add one more thing about how's the messaging getting out. I do think the younger generation, they live on TikTok, they live on YouTube, and they live on Twitter. And that, I bet a lot of you don't, right? You don't like being on that platform. But, you got to go to the same sandbox where everyone's at. And, maybe if we want to be successful here, when somebody posts something on Twitter that you don't agree with, politely give another opinion. Because a lot of people will read the first post, and they do read down in the comments. But if you guys aren't on these platforms, no other opinion is showing up. So, that's another idea.
I do think that if you're on social media, you are starting to see a change, right? Like I remember a couple of years ago when I would post, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter, and like I would post things and people would be like, no, and now it's like person after person is like, she's right. So I think the more education you do, the better. And my thing is, show us who's funding what, right? Like all of this money that people have all these ulterior motives to be spending on different grassroots efforts that really aren't grassroots. So you're kind of, you think you're young and you're supporting like this cause, but you're really not. You're really like just, supporting the man at the end of the day. Sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but it's kind of like what's going on.
Thank you, Jovita. And this is a question from Paul, and because I am half blind, I might have to ask for a clarification. In a recent Planning Commission meeting, it was mentioned during public comment that there are approximately 40,000 plus housing units in the permitting process, and because of interest rates, they're long in coming or delayed. New cannot read the word pays for the infrastructure work, sewer, water, and utilities. I don't, what is that word, Paul?
I meant to look at it, right? Pays for the infrastructure, the sewer, the water, and the utilities and everything, even with the 40,000 units on the books.
Right, so you're asking like who brings a actual sewer line or increases sewer capacity? Right, so it depends. You are asking some fundamentally important questions, and these are actually questions that were implicated by what Lori said, which is if San Francisco were to expand from a city of 800,000 to a city of 1.2 million, do we have the overall capacity? And the reason I'm saying it carefully is because there are provisions where if a developer needs to bring a sewer line from a sewer lateral to their development, the developer pays for that. If there is not water service at the property, the developer pays to bring that. But if we are talking capacity issues for a new sewage treatment plant, for water storage in our upstream reservoirs, the entire rate base pays for that. So there are two answers to your question. The simple answer is you want to go build something in a place where there isn't infrastructure, the developer pays to bring that infrastructure to the project. But relative to the larger comprehensive, when you cumulatively add another 100,000 people, 200,000 people, upgrades to the entire system are borne by all of the ratepayers. Go ahead, Mendoza.
Maybe you might be able to answer this question. So in the city's housing element and in the city's plans for accommodating these new 20,000 units or more, 72,000 units, is that discussed and planned for? And does that become part of the city's capital plan? How are we going to upgrade our sewer system if needed, our water system if needed, not for the current already somewhat dilapidated stormwater and sewer system, but for a whole new set of folks? Or is that something that we just don't think about while we respond to HCD about how we're going to accommodate all the units that they want us to accommodate.
So this may be above my pay grade, but my belief is that the environmental impact report on the housing element looked at those things. Now, when you start delving down into individual departmental reality, for instance, our Public Utilities Commission, which is our wastewater and freshwater purveyor, so that's the SFPUC is who brings water to your tap and who deals with all of the sewage discharge. You will see in their capital plan through the year 2040 that there is about $11 billion of investment that they have to make to deal with increased capacity and to deal with deferred capital maintenance. You will see that that leads to a threefold increase in your rates between now and 2040. It also assumes an increase in water demand from 54 million gallons per day to 64 million gallons per day. But you can ask the same questions relative to transit infrastructure, the same thing relative to the condition of our pavement and our streets and what have you. So yeah, all of that comes with attendant impacts, but it was considered in the EIR on the housing element. Electricity, I mean, if you think, I love PG&E because they make San Francisco look good. That's all I can say. The next question is, what are the bill numbers, authors, carrying legislation you referred to? Where is the $6 billion for a bond in San Francisco? Or the billions of dollars for a bond in San Francisco. So relative to bill numbers and authors, let me just tell you, it is like a rugby game in Sacramento. I mean, there are legislators who...
I'm asking about the ones that were positive bills,
Oh.
that were helpful bills, so that we knew what those were, maybe we could support them.
Francis, so which are those bills? It was in one of your presentations.
Slides on one of the guys.
This may be not exactly what you're getting at, but I know that part of Fernando's presentation included a reference to Proposition I, which was a...
No.
Okay, I don't think that was part of mine.
So I think Alex Lee, who's somewhat of a YIMBY, and also has been pushing for some social housing bills.
But it's not.
What's that?
It's not actually a social housing bill. He just calls it that.
Okay.
So yeah, so there's depths to that. That's the one name that I remember. There's a few others that are kind of moving their way through. We can talk afterwards. We can look them up.
What I'm asking is, if the legislature is passing all these Verkakta bills, why don't we come back with something that is going to address that? And, you know, it's lovely, Jovita, that you're talking about a statewide initiative, but honest to God, it's a little unrealistic, in my opinion, having worked through politics in the last 40 years that I've been here. So let's start with trying to put something on paper in the legislature and then get this organization that we're working with to move something in the direction we want it to go, using legislative intent, putting in the data that we have that shows that undercuts the bills that Wiener introduced. Let's do something started in the legislature.
Francis, we've been trying for 5 years. It falls on deaf ears. We've been in Sacramento so many times.
Well, who do you have writing bills? I want to know what we.
Well, you could write the bills, but you need someone to carry the bill. You need and these legislators don't want to carry the bills. No, so Grayson, for example, he's been trying to push bills to help with affordable housing, and he said he has the scars to prove it, right? Because now everyone turns his back on him. Anyone who tries to go against the leaders, which was Atkins for a long time, they dealt with the repercussions. No one stands, they're told, you're told sometimes how to vote. They are specifically told how to vote, and that's why I'm saying we need to tell our legislators what we want.
Well, fine, then let's
And I agree. I would love an inclusionary affordable housing bill that every single, development in California has to have X amount of affordable housing. I would love a field worker housing bill. I would love all of these things, but there's no money in it for them. So they really don't care.
Yeah, honestly, I can't believe that there's not even a moderate Republican that you could go to. Don't laugh.
No, we should. No, this is precisely why we should be. No, I hear you. Let's after this. Why don't we sit down and visit about that? I'm going to try to before 5 o'clock see if we can answer as many of these. How do state senators like Weiner and McGuire, for those of you who do not know, hails from the northern coast, Sonoma, Marin, get away with. Oh, and by the way, is the new head of the state Senate. Get away with circumventing the state law that prohibits unfunded state mandates like their housing laws. And this is actually a really good question. It was actually one of the questions I had for the panel, but wanted to get to your questions, which is actually, it's not a state law. It is the state constitution that says that the state government cannot create unfunded mandates for local government with certain exceptions, of which this is not one. And that is, I don't know, Jovita, if you've asked your city attorney, but I have asked my city attorney how the heck it is that they can say, thou shalt build 32,000 units of affordable housing, which they know means we have to pay for it. That is an unfunded mandate. And there was a big to-do a couple months ago when I passed a resolution at the Board of Supervisors, non-binding, that said it was our policy to take any and all actions to push back against the state, including but not limited to suing the state. And this is one of the avenues that we are looking at to whoever asked that question.
Still on the table?
Is what's still on the table?
The ability to sue the state is still on the table?
Is the
Sue the state specifically for ignoring it. Is it still on the table, or the state attorney came by and again today?
No, we can sue the state. My city attorney, who is a former assembly member who may have been waist deep in the YIMBY movement, says to this supervisor, hey, I'm willing to go there. He's an independent elected official, but it's got to be a good case that I am likely to win. So we're in the let's find a good case that we're likely to win mode. It seems that the only answer to the state power grab is a voter proposition that say all planning is ultimately done and controlled locally. That is not a question, it is a statement. And just so that we're clear, if you want to put a state constitutional amendment on the ballot, you have to collect signatures, millions and millions of signatures. There are two ways, or a combination of two ways, that happens. Either with a vast amount of money, I'm talking like no less than $10 million minimum price of admission, or an army of people from the Mexican border to the Oregon border who are willing to go get signatures, or a combination thereof. This is a mighty big hill to climb. I mean, I salute Jovita and our neighborhood voices for having the courage of going there, but it is a massive troop movement, and then once you get it on the ballot, you need millions of dollars. The last time something like this actually happened was Proposition 20 that created the Coastal Commission. And that was funded in the year 1972. On the real estate side, they outspent the pro side, not by 10 to 1, but by 30 to 1. Every major newspaper in the state of California, including our own Chronicle, were on the side of the real estate industry. It prevailed 55-45. It was truly an army that made that happen. So, I mean, people are going to have to learn a lot more before, we've got that kind of enthusiasm to get that level of signatures. But this is why we're all here today. Has there been any thought given to pushback and challenge of HCD? They were audited in 2021 and the methodology is wrong. True. Director has said he will not recirculate the regional housing needs assessment, even though the California Department of Finance put out a report last summer to say they were wrong. True. I mean, this is, as far as I'm concerned, a rogue agency. That California is declining in population, not growing. The regional housing needs assessment numbers are wrong, and the Housing and Community Development Department needs to be forced to recalculate. Yeah, it's another mandate, and the answer is I agree. And as Scoop Nisker used to say, remember Scoop Nisker? Yeah. If you don't like the news, let's go out and make some of our own. How did state determine SF needed 82,000 units? And the answer is, I think Kyle kind of explained that it was, it was political in part. By the way, I want to tell you a story, which is that the mayor of San Francisco, the planning director of San Francisco appointed by the mayor, the board of supervisors all knew that this 82,000 number was unrealistic. We all pushed back against ABAG. The mayor wrote letters, etc. This was not, there wasn't a political division at City Hall, but once the number came down and ABAG told us to pound sand, then the mayor, said, we've got no choice but to build the 82,000 units, no questions asked. And as we've heard here today, we've been set up to fail, which doesn't mean that we're not going to try. But but I think that question has been answered. While affordable housing is important, please talk more about what we can do to fight against the proposed height increases. You've got to get involved. You've just got to get involved. I was very impressed. I hope Commissioner Catherine Moore was impressed by the turnout that happened last Thursday. Thank you, Catherine Petrin, and thank you, Lori, for organizing that. We all have to put the fear of God into this administration, into half of my colleagues, and that's the answer, or it's going to happen. Board is evenly divided. That is all of the questions. Are there any closing comments any of you would like to make? Oh, wait, one more. Wait, this is not a comment. This is a doctoral dissertation. Hold on a second. The state will very probably pass an amendment to Cal Green, the mandatory section of the building code requiring all new residential construction to be zero emission or zero emitting. As this forum is trying to reach young people, how do you square no or very limited new development to zero emitting new development, especially when we're in a climate crisis and buildings account for 25% of the state's greenhouse gas emissions? And I'm going to give this to Fernando, but I will say one thing, which is the sequestered carbon that we have in the existing buildings that we have is probably the best conservation measures that we could have. Fernando.
I think the only thing that I'll add is we are already in a place where all new buildings will be all electrical, so there's that part of this. But I think there's a question of the zero emissions and what kind of construction we're doing, what kind of resources are being put into buildings. As soon as you're over 5 stories, you're going into a concrete construction with a lot more investment and resources into those buildings and a lot more cost per square foot. And so the question around zero emissions and the question around who are we building for are, I think, and how high we're building are very much interconnected.
Thank you, Fernando. Last question that I have is, why isn't the state being sued for the flawed RHNA numbers by many or combined municipalities? I will tell you, without revealing attorney-client privilege advice, that the analysis done by our city attorney was that ship had sailed and our chances of prevailing in a lawsuit for these RHNA numbers that had already been adopted a couple of years ago were slim, which does not mean that you can't challenge them again in 2031, but they thought that that was not a piece of litigation that we were likely to prevail in. Maybe Susan Brandt Hawley has a different view, which I'd be happy to hear. Has Scott Wiener been investigated? I do not know. But I will say this about myself and any other elected official, which is you can go to online and you can see where all of our campaign funds come from. And when you go to a state legislative member, they actually break it out by types of industry. I did that for my former colleague, Mr. Wiener, the other day. 57% from his last election cycle comes from the real estate industry.
Highest of any legislator.
Highest, there you go. Thank you, Susan. Highest of any legislator. Follow the money. What can be done to remove him from office? And the answer is there's an election in a month from today.
Who's running against him, Aaron? Nobody.
I'm not going to engage in electoral whatever, but you got your ballot handbook, figure it out. The state, okay, wait, one more. Black History Month. What has been your engagement with Black-Brown communities significantly impacted by regentrification, YIMBYism, and NIMBYism, which is a very good question. A lot of this in San Francisco has actually been driven by REP, racial equity in planning, in all planning actually. It's racial equity in all planning, which is a group of neighborhood activists and planning aficionados from all over the city, from the Mission to the Excelsior and Ingleside and Sunset, who have really been a guiding policy and political force around these discussions, at least in the circles that I inhabit. And part of when I was asking the earlier question about what led to this time and this movement, yes, some of it is absolutely a concerted, 100% intentional effort by people with money who have, invested in state senators. The other thing is that there has been a reckoning, and academics have set forth in books that have become popular the history of racist redlining in San Francisco and other communities. That is absolutely real, it is absolutely true. Covenants and deed restrictions that prevented or were designed to prevent the sale of real property to people of color. All of that is true. It is also true that the YIMBY movement has harnessed that as saying that all of their plans for upzoning and what have you are anti-racist, which is also not true. So, this is very complicated, and I think it requires a lot of thinking and a lot of reckoning. And then last it says, yes, sorry, Fernando, please.
So I think one of the things that when we talk about these state policies having a racist underpinning, part of what is happening is the new segregation of our region, where, for better or worse, because of that redlining, our communities and our inner cities had a lot of diversity, a lot of disinvestment that went along with it, a lot of bad schools at times. That diversity is being attacked so that the cities can become whiter and so that people of color are displaced to other places on the fringe of the region. That is what we've been seeing over the last 20 years, but that is what is being accelerated by these policies. And these state politicians will never admit it. Nobody says they're racist. They're simply trying to accommodate more housing. And I'll just tell a story. At some point in the past, a certain state senator, who I won't name, but we've been talking a lot about, we met with him about the T-line. You remember the T-line turnaround. And so the T-line, there was some, this was 2015 or so, the 3rd Street light rail had just been built. Uni had staffing problems, so the light rail would go as far as Mission Bay and it would stop and turn around and come back. The light rail that serves the Bayview. And we were meeting with various supervisors. We met with this particular supervisor. So, well, there's nothing racist about this. The numbers say that most of the people who are using the T-line are going from downtown to Mission Bay. So that's it's just about the numbers, and the numbers can't be racist. So this is who's making these decisions without any consideration of people's needs across race and class.
So, like I said, I grew up in Oakland. If you look at Antioch, Oakley, Brentwood, where I live, you will find a lot of Latinos and a lot of black people because we couldn't afford to stay in. We've been gentrified out. We couldn't stay anymore. And so, it's you might not see that in the numbers, like, oh, they're moving, they're happy, and it's like, no, a lot of us really love where we lived. I loved Oakland. I love East Oakland. Like, I still rep East Oakland more than I do Brentwood. But, these policies don't take into consideration the needs of brown and black people, especially, when I talk about parking, think about the field worker who needs their truck to get to work. You take away their parking, you take away their job. Think about the housekeeper that has to hit 4 or 5 houses a day to be able to make a living. You can't carry your equipment on public transit. You take away their living. It's a night shift worker, which are usually people of color. You take away their cars and their parking. So all of these policies, to me, it's like they pretend to care about me and you, but they don't care about us. They just care about the bottom dollar of the developer. And to me, that's what it all comes down to at the end of the day. And if you really care about us, then write it into the bill. And not one bill demands affordable housing. And not only does it not really, but even on Builder's Remedy, it goes from 20% to now to 10% in SB 423. So not like they're telling me more and more every day, they don't care about us at all whatsoever. Because if they did, they would put it in the bill.
Perfect. Go ahead.
Thanks for that. Good question, and kind of touching on what Fernando talked about earlier about. Sorry. So you made a good point about the trend over the past few decades of people low-income minority households being pushed out of San Francisco because they can't afford to stay here. And wouldn't you say that part of that is just freezing our city in amber and not allowing them to stay in the city they actually want to live in? So I think that's the frustration that I'm feeling a lot, is that by not making any change in our city, it means people do get pushed out. People are constantly moving to the city, and if we don't build new housing for people as they come in, it's pushing out people to the periphery. And so shouldn't we be building housing where there's actually opportunity and jobs and functional public transit instead of the edges of our region that don't have those resources? So I think that's kind of the frustration that I'm feeling right now. And I guess if you're saying that a lot of the solutions that Sacramento is handing down to us aren't good, what are your solutions then to meet that problem?
So I think we talked a lot about those solutions in the slideshow, which is primarily about housing affordability and about tenants' rights. And in between that, about preserving the housing that we have for the folks who are here. So on an individual basis, we have rent control, but we don't have community rental stability. We don't even have stability for homeowners who are low income, who are faced with increasing costs but don't have an ability to pay for that new roof. And so that is what is causing that outward shift. As rents keep going up and up, as property values go up, it has nothing to do with the folks who are there, right? They are losing their homes because of these changes. So one of the ways, as you said, we could build more housing, but we're seeing Governor Newsom cutting the housing funding. We're seeing these rezonings, forced rezonings, lowering the amount of affordable housing that market rate developers can build. I think one of the questions is around these sort of solutions that come down from Sacramento. The solution is, I think we've talked about it a lot, I'll just repeat it again. The solution is somehow if we allow more market rate housing to be approved, so remember there's 40,000 units already approved, aren't getting built, money's not there, investors aren't interested, somehow this is this magic thing that's going to solve this. Then they do build it, right? We've seen those towers downtown, some housing was getting built. a third of those units are vacant. So it's not even housing. We can't even call it housing. We call it investment for foreign investors. 2/3 maybe are being lived in at $6,000 rents. That's not solving that central problem of how we stabilize our communities, how we stop that regional resegregation. That is really the plan. That's the plan. If the plan of redlining and the plan of urban renewal was the plan, the racist plan of the 1950s, this is the racist plan of today.
So I will stick around. I want to thank the Telegraph Hill Dwellers, and I want to thank the Italian Athletic Club, and I know we promised to clear out at 5. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Clint Pryforce. I'm a council member for the city of Emeryville, part of the ONV team. And I know that Yimby likes to say that with more housing, that's going to somehow reverse gentrification. There's actually a great documentary by Independent Lens called, I believe it's Raising Living Square. And it talks about climate gentrification and that a lot of those high rises in Miami, sea waters are rising. And so folks are nervous. And so where do they go? They go into neighborhoods, into communities, and find ways to implement market rate housing, say this for affordable housing. But as you can see, everywhere this model goes, the number of black folk and brown folk decreases. So we talked about the numbers, that the numbers are racist. You can look at the numbers, and you can't, everywhere you see YIMBYism and a lot of these developer plans go, it decreases. That's it. It decreases. And so more housing does not equal more black and brown folk. If anything, those folks who are there are being priced out, and the solution is for them to rent, not home own, not create multi-generational wealth, but to rent. And so the slogan is essentially let them eat cake, which is let them rent. And that is not how you create wealth in America for black and brown families.
Thank you, PhD. Let's do this again. And I think at least the initial near-term answer is don't forget to vote on March 5th, and please vote for Proposition A so we can do our part here in San Francisco. Thank you all very, very much.